Welcome to Firsts in Fiction, your first stop for learning to write fantastic fiction. I'm your host, Aaron Gansky, author of The Bargain, The Hand of Adonai series, and Firsts in Fiction.
And I'm Alton Gansky, the author of numerous books, mostly fiction, some nonfiction, and other such things, most recently the Harbinger series.
And a great series it is. I've been reading it. Hi, I am Molly. I am producer of the podcast, curator of the Unemployment Cookbook, and the soon-to-be, hopefully finished, first draft of NOLA.
Excellent. Super excited to hear that. I guess I should also add Heart Song, because that released on July 31st, and we had a great launch party for it on Facebook. So yes. To those of you who were there, thank you for that. It was a lot of fun. But then it's just going to get too long. I'm going to have to start doing what Pop says. I'm the author of books and novels. And of course, I've got a few left to go before I catch up with you, Pop. So I don't think you need to feel threatened just yet. But a reminder for those of you listening to the audio-only podcast, you can see us live at aarongansky.com/firstsinfictionlive at 6:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time every other Tuesday. Or, of course, you can always watch us on YouTube at your convenience. If you do, I ask that you hit that thumbs up button. Helps us out quite a bit. Also, don't be afraid to subscribe. That also helps out, and share with your friends, your writing friends, so that they can also subscribe. Get some good writing tips for free, which is always nice. Now, if you're with us in the chat room, I'm trying to go through the notes of all the things I have to say. If you're going through, joining us in the chat room, there should be some links at the top of the chat room that you can use to click and share with your social media followers on Twitter and Facebook and all that kind of stuff, so that they can join in too if they are interested. So I think that's everything. Let's see, Heart Song released. I wanted to announce that. Anything else that I need to announce, or did I get it all?
You got it all.
Pops, anything new going on with you? Any books coming up in the works?
No, nothing new with me. Same old me. I'm doing a lot of editing right now, so that's kind of eating up my creative time.
Yeah. I've got. I'm going back to school soon, so I'm been in teacher mode the last few days and haven't been able to do too much writing, so it's always kind of sad. But
so you're going back to teach school, not going back to school.
I'm going back to school in order to teach students, yes, but I will not be a student. I'm not returning as a student. My wife is doing both, student and being a teacher, so she's just an overachiever that way. Well, let's move on. Our Ask the Author question tonight comes from Caleb Walton via Facebook, and I'm doing a quick scan of the chat room. I do not see him in here. Shame on Caleb.
Right.
Maybe he'll join in a little bit later. He asks, how much of the content of your novels is outlined beforehand, and how much is done spontaneously as you write? So I think this is a really good question. We talk a lot about, discovery writers, what we call discovery writers, or pansters. That is, people who do not necessarily outline meticulously before they begin, versus outliners who want to sit down and draw up a complete plan, a step-by-step plan of the saga that they're about to embark on in writing. I think the answer is going to be different for all of us, and it's probably going to be different for every writer. I do very little outlining at the beginning, very little. I might do kind of a macro outline, which is just like 3 or 4 bullet points. I know I want them to end up here, and I know they're going to do these 2 or 3 things along the way. But that's about it, all that I do. Now, as I write, I wouldn't say that I outline several scenes ahead, but I might do 1 or 2 scenes ahead, so I kind of know where I'm going. But I've noticed, for me, that those outlines change, and that's one reason why I don't outline beforehand, is because I can't stick to an outline no matter how hard I try. It's really, really difficult for me. The best I can do is come up with an ending before I get there, and then write toward it. But I have a real tough time scripting the events in between. And so that's kind of where I'm at. How about you, Pops?
Well, let me speak to something you just said, because I think this is one of the biggest misconceptions we have, especially among new writers, is that if you outline, you can't change anything. I'm going to sit down, I'm going to outline this. Now I've got it written down, I've got it in my computer, or however you did it, ink on paper, and now I'm stuck with this. And that isn't true. I don't know a single outliner that does that. They will outline the book, and sometimes if they're lucky, the book will follow that outline. There'll be that skilled at seeing the future of where the book's going to go. But outlining doesn't really do that. They change it as they go. And you have to always be willing to do that. That's true if you're an intuitive writer. You think you know where the book's going, and then something may change. So it is not unusual for an outliner to be going along, and then a few new scenes will pop into their head, and they'll pursue that, add that to the book. So it's the point of an outline is to get you started, to make sure you have a full story and that you have an ending, but it isn't to handcuff you. It's there to guide you. And if you need to change it, you can change an outline just as easily as you can change a manuscript. So we really need to get rid of that idea that an outline is a thing you have to stick to. It's not like the rungs of a ladder suddenly disappear on you. It's not that way. It's to get you to think in terms of acts, getting through, having some plot points. Do you have enough drama? So I think outlining is a very good thing. Now, for most of my writing, I've been an intuitive writer. I don't usually outline. I normally outline if I'm on deadline. I do a much better job with that. But even if I do that, which I would have to do, for example, in the Harbinger series, because I'm dealing with a much smaller book, I had to be tighter in my writing and my planning, and I had to produce it very quickly, every 6 to 8 weeks. So when it became my turn, I couldn't start mine until the previous author was done with theirs, and then I might have 8 weeks to get the whole thing done. So I would outline those things. Not once did I go point by point through all of them. Some of the things I thought would be chapters became just part of a single chapter, and the new chapters would appear. That's fine. I know that. I just know what's coming up next, and it may change, but that's all right. That's what an outline does. To answer Caleb, there is no percentage. Caleb, most intuitive writers do very little outlining per se, maybe a handful of scenes at a time, often as they get closer to the end of the book, because these things begin to be driven by the story that's already written. So sometimes they will do that, and 4 or 5 scenes will come to mind on them. And again, remember, an outline isn't page upon page upon page upon page of writing. Some outlines are done on just a few pages. It's basically a big synopsis. Some are done by hand. Some are very detailed. Depends on the person. But outliners usually will outline the entire book, at least most of it, but they always know there's going to be a change. That's part of the deal. So I tend to outline again when I'm on deadline. And for new writers, I just want to say it never hurts to outline. I suggest that every writer try outlining. It'll be very revealing about their style of writing, about their way their creativity works out. And usually you can't go wrong outlining, but it's upfront work. It's uploaded, and a lot of people don't like that. So, so the short answer is there is no percentage. And every book is going to be different. Every story is different.
Yeah. How about you, Molly?
I don't outline. I have tried it, and it does not flow for me, and I'm always changing it. And because I have this weird thing, like a really weird thing about I can't work from papers that have scribbles on it. So if I do an outline and I have to change something, that means I have to rewrite the entire outline, because I'm just a control freak weird that way. So I have learned to just scribble copious notes on scrap paper, and as I write a particular scene, I will either toss the notes or file them. It's not always the greatest way to stay on track, so I try to number the pages. I guess that's sort of an outline, but as a discovery writer, that's basically how I do it. I applaud people who can outline and stick to the outline. Al, thank you for telling me I don't have to stick to the outline, so maybe I'll give that a try on my next book.
Well, that's the thing about being a creative. If you're creative, you're always creative. So
yes.
As things begin to develop, and it is not uncommon to be halfway through a chapter, you write a couple lines and you go, oh, that's what's going on. And then everything from that point on will change. Doesn't mean you have to redo the whole outline. You just make whatever changes you need as you go along.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's a certain irony here in that I had to outline my first novel, which is unpublished, the first complete novel that I wrote. I had to outline it in order to finish it because I couldn't finish it without outlining. I just kept getting off track, and the story would just take different weird turns, and nothing ever got accomplished. So I outlined, and that was able to help keep the forward momentum going. Since that time, I don't know that I've outlined much of anything. The Bargain was interesting because I had a lot of the stories written already, and all I had to do was find the ones that I liked and find a way to work them into this centralized narrative. So I guess you could argue that was a type of an outline, but I didn't necessarily decide which story was going to go where or when. I just knew that they were going to appear in some way, and I had to find the thread that wove them together. With Who is Harrison Sawyer, I've shared this story before. I discovered the ending about halfway through, and I quickly wrote it down, and that was about the extent of my outlining. So it varies for me from project to project, and one of the reasons I choose not to outline up front is because I do feel like I change it so much anyway, it almost feels like counterproductive to me. My current work in progress, though, has been very unruly. I'm very disappointed in it. I'm going to have to sit it down and have a stern talking to with it. But I've outlined probably a third of the book, like multiple times, multiple drafts of multiple outlines, different parts of the book, the first third, the second third, the third third, all those types of things. And I keep trying to, I have all these scenes written because I was working from an outline, and now I'm asking the question, do I get to keep these scenes, or are they going to have to go away? And so the answer to that is do a little more outlining. And I've found a way to kind of reclaim those scenes, but now I have to re-outline and figure out what order they're going to come in, because they're not going to come in the order that I wrote them. So Pops, you make a very, very good point. You don't have to stick to an outline. And like you say, outlining for beginners is never a bad idea. It can only help, I think, improve your writing. So there's that. So I don't want to call it a safety net, because I think that has a negative connotation, and it makes it sound like people who use outlines aren't capable of writing the way I write, and that's not the impression I want to give. But I think as a new writer, it does give you something to lean on, and something to support you if that's something that you feel that you need. But again, every creative is a little bit different.
Yeah, I would never say it that way. In no way is it a safety net. The purpose of an outline is for you to formulate the basic plot and characters. And it's not there because you're afraid you're not going to be able to finish. It's there to force you to think ahead. So it's not a safety net. If anything, it's a very vicious muse with a whip. It keeps moving you forward on that. Fortunately, you can change the outline as you go, and add things when they're new and drop things when they don't fit anymore. But I would never see it as a safety net. It doesn't have anything to do with whether or not you're capable of finishing it. It has to do with whether or not you want to proceed in the best organized fashion that you can, and not start chasing rabbits, as some will do. So if anything, it is more of a guide than a safety net. But you remember, you're the guide of the guide. So.
Fitzgerald was a notorious outliner, and
was he?
I guess he turned out okay. I guess he's all right.
Maybe.
F. Scott Fitzgerald. I'm not sure if you've heard of him. He wrote a little book, The Great Gansky, or something like that. It's hard for me. It's close though.
Well, no, it's not close at all. I'm sorry, it's not. Okay, yes, it is. Well, no.
It's got Gansky in the name at least, right?
No, it totally doesn't.
No. Okay. Well, anyhow,
he wrote the mediocre Gansky.
The mediocre Gansky.
Then changed it to the Great Gatsby. So.
Yeah, so many jokes. We're going to move on. Tonight, our main topic is writing the suspense thriller novel. I wasn't going to tell you what our topic was. I was just going to let you live in suspense for a while. But instead, I decided to thrill you with our podcast tonight. Now, reading a suspense novel can be a real thrill.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, how long did it take you to come up with that? Like, did you rehearse that for 2 weeks here or something, or what?
Top of my head. top of my head. The wit is quick and it is sharp. So we've got some tips and tricks for you on writing a great suspense novel or thriller novel. Now, obviously, I am the world's leading authority on this topic because I've written 2 novels that can be classified as suspense or thriller. So obviously, with my stable of writing, I should be the expert. But we're going to do a little turnaround, and we're going to let you play the expert tonight, since you've done, I think, a few more than 2 novels. How many would you say off the top of your head, how many of your novels would you say are suspense / mystery / thriller novels?
Even the ones that I did that are billed as mystery were suspense novels. And some borderline on thriller. We'll talk about what the difference between them are. They're related. My last novel, Wounds, was a thriller. Started off as a thriller, and that's what I was aiming for because of the nature of the story. But most of my would call it suspense or supernatural suspense when there was a supernatural element to it. So well, that might be the best place to start our discussion tonight, is kind of the difference between suspense, mystery, thriller. I mean, we throw these terms around often. You've even said some of the mysteries that you've written were actually suspense. Can you talk to us a little bit about this particular genre and the breakdown of these, maybe, I don't know if you'd call them subgenres? Yeah, let's talk about genres in general. Let's do the big picture first, because I don't like to assume everybody knows these things. And based on my experience in teaching and a whole bunch of different writers' conferences, I would say a lot of people don't know. A genre is basically the type of story that you're writing. That's all we mean by that. And there's lots of genres, but don't get too caught up compartmentalizing because they cross over. I'll talk about that in a little bit. So when we talk about genre, we're saying that some books are Westerns, like Louis L'Amour. And when you hear that, this is a Western, you're thinking, okay, we're going to be in the late 1800s, and we're probably going to be in a portion of the South or the central part of the country, maybe all the way into New Mexico. So, and there's going to be horses and stuff like that. And you would be right with that. That's a particular genre. There's historicals, which I think is interesting when they divide these, because technically a Western is a historical. At least it's historic in nature. But historicals are usually larger books dealing with a bigger picture. So think like James Michener's Hawaii, something like that. Historicals are sometimes sagas. They go on for several books, a dozen books. Jack Kavanaugh's did a series, I think his ran 12 books, and then he did another series of historical writing. Historicals are fascinating and fun. Mysteries we're going to talk about a little bit more in detail, but let me give you the big picture. Mysteries, think Agatha Christie, Sue Grafton, some of those people. Mystery probably has the most subcategories of any other genre. There's cozy mysteries, usually small town kinds of things. Again, Agatha Christie would be good with Ms. Marple, Harry Q. Poirot. There's really not lots of actions. There's not gunshots and that kind of thing going off, except for the murder. But they're a little quieter, the kind of thing you want to read on a nice rainy night. But mysteries can also include police procedurals, which go into the way the police work as they hunt down a murderer or whatever the crime might be. And it's a little more gritty. Language is usually rougher and will border more on suspense and thrillers than most other mysteries might. Romantic mysteries, of course, the driving force in the story is both a mystery that has great romance around it, a lot of those being written. Then there are just straight mysteries like private eye type things. And there's really probably another half dozen of these, but you get the idea. There's different categories. In a little bit, I'm going to tell you the difference between that and some of the other genres, because mysteries get confused with our next one, which is suspense. When I think of suspense, I think of Dean Koontz primarily. Though Dean Koontz has done science fiction, he's done horror. He's really more of a suspense novelist. So suspense, we could do subcategories of those as horror. So think Stephen King, who's one of his, the Tower, part of the Tower trilogy was recently released as a movie. Just saw that yesterday. And it focuses on horror, but as I'll talk about King in just a minute, he blends a bunch of these together. So it's really hard to categorize him, some of his books. Supernatural suspense, and I did a whole bunch of those, a ship possessed, a submarine that comes back in the wrong ocean 50 years late without his crew, but it did not come back alone, and that's the supernatural aspect to it. I've done a lot of supernatural suspense. Spy tales can be suspenseful. Thrillers are a form of suspense, and we're going to talk more about that in a minute, so I won't go into it too much. But think of a thriller as a suspense novel on steroids. And its focus is primarily action, not just suspense, but action. Then there's police, crime, suspense stories, medical suspense. Robin Cook made quite a good living out of doing medical suspense. Dr. Robin Cook, I should say, give him full credit for his medical degree. And there's others too. That's a very popular category. Techno, this is my term for it. Michael Crichton. You read Jurassic Park. Is that science fiction? Yeah, it's science fiction, but it's really more about technology gone wild that escapes. So I usually classify that as a techno suspense. Then there are other types of genres, futuristic or fantasy. Ray Bradbury, J.K. Rowling, some guy named Aaron Gansky.
He's no good. He's no good.
He's done a little fantasy. General market, those are the books you don't know where to put anyplace else. Danielle Steele. I don't know what to classify some of these books as. Chick lit was very, very big. And that became teen lit and guy lit and stuff like that. It's short for chick literature, books written for chicks, girls, women, all the other different kinds of names. But it's things that women would be interested in. There's humor, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So you can have a humor, a genre, romance, Nora Roberts, some of the others. Still bestseller both in general market, Christian market. That's really kind of taken over. Action adventure, Clive Cussler, Tom Clancy, some guy named Alton Gansky has done some.
Is he any good?
No. He's written a lot of books. 2 of them are good.
Wow, these Gansky people, I need to stay away from them as much as possible.
Now, notice when I say that I've written a lot of books, 2 of them are good. I don't tell you which 2. You have to go through all of them to find out.
Good marketing.
It's a marketing ploy.
Yeah, it's all it is a marketing ploy. Okay, but now the problem with the genre, and I want everybody to really kind of get their head around this, is don't get too caught up in compartmentalizing because usually they're hyphenated. So most stories you'll find will be hyphenated, romantic mystery, military action adventure, that sort of thing. So as I was writing, I was thinking of Stephen King's Dreamcatcher, which is a story from some years back, but it's a horror story, but it's based on a science fiction premise. So in a sense, it's science fiction, but it really involves a coming of age story of some kids as they grow up, and then it kind of morphs into a male midlife crisis affair. So it's one of those kinds of stories, but it's also mysterious in nature because there's a mystery that needs to be solved, and it's paced like an action adventure. So what genre is that? It's Stephen King genre.
All of the above?
Yeah. And by the way, if you're starting out, I don't recommend doing that. Pick a couple genres, blend them together, that's fine. You get much beyond that, then you sound scattered. When you're Stephen King, you can do whatever you want because he is
Stephen King.
Stephen King, yeah. And see, he can do that stuff and do it very well. Most of us would have trouble maintaining all of those. Okay, so does that make sense?
Yes.
It does. It absolutely does. And I appreciate that. And like you say, the genre is constantly shifting. And I would say most books usually carry a hyphen. Romance, suspense, stuff like that. So right. I appreciate that breakdown. But you did mention that a thriller is a type of suspense. What can you kind of give us a clearer definition of the differences between? How do we know if we're writing a mystery or versus a suspense versus a thriller?
Sure. Yeah, let's go through some of the hallmarks of each. Now, again, I keep lobbying not to get too strict on these because I think it takes away your creativity. But these are basic guidelines. These are just some elements that help define them. So the basis of every mystery is a puzzle. So if you have a puzzle, that is, you're keeping something from the reader and you're wanting the reader to follow along and try to figure it out, like a Hercule Poirot mystery, Sherlock Holmes. You don't know who's doing what, but you're being given information as a reader along the way. If it's a puzzle of some sort, then you're writing a mystery. Suspense, the key element is fear. The reader, you want the reader to feel fear. Something's about to happen. As a reader, you know what's going to happen, what could happen, and so you're afraid for the character. A thriller, as I said, is a suspense novel on steroids, and therefore a thriller is, basic element is just a stinking nightmare. I mean, it's problem after problem, and it's just, and it's a huge problem. It can be a bloody problem. The world could be coming to an end. We don't know, but it's much higher and much faster paced. So puzzle for a mystery, fear for suspense, just a nightmare for a thriller. Again, depending on what kind of thriller you're writing, but there's really going to be some kind of nightmarish aspect to it. Like in Wounds, for example, it's crime after crime, vicious crime after crime after crime. Each one is left as a clue, and that's its whole purpose, is this person has been killed, so the killer can leave a clue. You think, what kind of guy would do that? Okay, so it's really a big nightmare. Then you realize there's going to be more killings until this thing is solved. So that made it a thriller. So it's got the fear element, but it's just ratcheted up. In a mystery, it's solver-based. You want the reader to be part of the solution. You want them to figure it out. Suspense, you don't care if they figure it out. You may tell them who the bad guy is. That might be right up front at the very beginning. In one of your most recent books, oh, help me out, The Gentle Killing, Murder in the Spring. Yeah, that's it. In that, you see a bad guy right up front. It's and there's no hiding who it is. So suspense, you don't hide stuff. You lay it out there. Now you measure it out. You don't give everything up front. You know, you kind of spoon it out bit by bit, but the reader knows what's going on. A thriller is a little different in that you're doing the same thing as suspense, but it's kind of hero-based. Someone is either chosen to be a hero or is thrust into the role of hero, and it's going to be this guy or this gal, or everything is just going to go bad, very, very bad. And so they get thrust into this, and they face problem after problem. A mystery, the reader identifies with a detective of some sort. It doesn't have to be a professional detective. Father Brown is fun to watch, fun to read, the G.K. Chesterton novels, and you identify with Father Brown. Even if you're a Protestant, you identify with Father Brown. Okay, so he's the detective, even though there are cops around doing the work and complaining that he's sticking his nose where it doesn't belong. But you know he's going to be the one to solve the mysteries. Same thing with Sherlock Holmes. It's the same deal. Nero Wolfe, just fabulous. Nero Wolfe is just some of the best in mysteries, best characterization ever. But you identify with Nero Wolfe, even though you don't like him. He's not the kind of guy you'd warm up to. But you like his sidekick, Archie Goodwin. In suspense, the reader's going to identify with the victim. So the victim's afraid, the reader's going to be afraid. In a thriller, the reader is going to identify with the hero and the victim. So is that making sense? See how these are little differences? All right, so if you're doing a graph and you put them over, and by the way, on the show notes, there is a chart of this, so get the show notes. But they do overlap. It's not either or, it's mostly than. And that's what distinguishes one from the other. In a mystery, it's thinking-centered. Right? I have to think to follow this mystery. So if I'm doing a Father Brown thing, I have to see what he sees and then wonder who that applies to. In suspense, it isn't thinking-centered, it's emotion-centered. It's mostly fear, trepidation, anxiety. Then in the thriller, it's very action-centered. There's just a lot of activity going on. One I skipped in a mystery, protagonist has skills. Father Brown is a very logical thinker. In suspense, the victim has to acquire some skills. So in my series with Maddie Glenn, Mayor Maddie Glenn, she has to deal with these problems and acquire skills, including fighting skills. Now, she doesn't go into training. She just has to fight for her life a time or two, depending on the book. So she has to acquire things she doesn't normally have. In a thriller, the protagonist has action skills, may not know it at the time, but finds strength that he or she doesn't know that they have. Okay, in a mystery, crucial action often happens off stage. mean, how many mysteries have you read or seen where you start with the body? You don't start with the murder.
Mm-hmm.
You start with the body. In a suspense, the action is always front and center, a crucial action. So the reader gets to see the bad guy. In a thriller, there are usually more than one stage. So, for example, you can have several antagonists in a thriller, and maybe just a single protagonist trying to defeat 3 people in different places. Like especially in conspiracy type thrillers, there's usually more than one person to beat.
Interesting.
That is.
I've got a work that I'm putting together now, and I'm learning the difference between the mystery and the suspense and the thriller. And I'm going through your chart here, Pops, and I'm looking at it as you go through, and I'm thinking, well, it's definitely suspense. And I go, oh, maybe it's a thriller. And I kind of go back and forth. But the more you go, the more I feel like it's falling in line with suspense. I really like what you've said so far about the protagonist acquiring the skills versus the protagonist already having those skills, et cetera. So that really kind of helps solidify it. There's more here to the chart. You want to continue working through that?
Yeah, a little bit, but let me tell you how to rationalize your problem here. Just remember, thriller is a type of suspense. So it doesn't matter which of the two you choose, you're right.
There you go.
Okay. Just again,
I like hearing that.
A thriller is just a suspense on steroids. The fear is heightened and it's just more action, and that's basically it. As a primary difference. In a mystery, you withhold information. We've talked about that. In suspense, you reveal information. Same thing in a thriller. You don't keep stuff from the reader. In fact, you force it down their throat. In a mystery, you tease them. In suspense and in thrillers, you force feed them. Just what you want them to know at just the right time. In a mystery, the reader is always a step behind the protagonist, trying to catch up. In suspense, the reader is current with the protagonist. In a thriller, which really makes the part of the thriller, sometimes the reader is ahead of the protagonist. We know what's going to go on. Why doesn't he know? Why doesn't she know? Mystery is often done in series, and that's because they're usually shorter. Suspense, usually done in standalone, and thrillers are almost always standalone. There are a few that will repeat. I'm thinking of Stephen James, for example. He's got an FBI agent series and some others, and they're all thrillers, but it's usually the same protagonist. But again, it's a suspense book with some stuff. Mystery, solve a crime or a tragedy. In suspense, you prevent additional crime or tragedy, or your goal is to avoid becoming the victim. In a thriller, it is so much more intense that a failure to act means certain doom. And then just a couple more here. Again, get the information because I know I'm moving quickly here, but just so we can distinguish between them. In mystery, you have suspects. In a suspense, you have a betrayer, usually, or some form of danger that's coming about. Thriller, there's usually some form of conspiracy, whether it's criminal conspiracy, political conspiracy. In mysteries, you provide red herrings. You purposely mislead your readers. In suspense, it's just filled with setbacks and obstacles. And then in thriller, it's just one danger after another, one great problem. So again, in Wounds, my book Wounds, in the thriller aspect is there's a death that's mysterious and another death, and there's a mystery. There's something that ties them all together. So there's a mystery element. That is, they have to solve that to find out what these deaths have in common so they can find the killer. But there's this repeated danger, and what they know is there's going to be another death, and there's nothing they can do about it. There's going to be another murder. And then just a couple more here. In a mystery, the ending satisfies the mind. Oh, I get it. I should have known from the beginning. In the suspense, the ending provides a release of tension. And in a thriller, the ending provides relief. So the way I like to put it is, in a mystery, you go, aha, at the end of the book. In suspense, you go, oh, my. And in a thriller, you go, phew, if you're the reader.
So I'm going to throw a bit of a curveball at you here because this was not in the show notes originally, but I just put it in there. Can you give us an exemplar novel for each of these particular genres that just kind of really show the prototypical mystery, the prototypical suspense versus the prototypical thriller? Can you think of examples off the top of your head that just really do a good job of showing each of these characteristics?
Sure. For mysteries in older books, I've already mentioned this one a couple times. G.K. Chesterton's Father Brown is very good. Anything by Agatha Christie is very good, especially the Hercule Poirot series. Sherlock Holmes is very good because they're always revealing a little bit of information. So those are good. More contemporary, I would say Sue Grafton for mysteries. She does the alphabet mysteries. A is for alibi. B is for burglary, I think. I can't remember all of them. And by the way, she became a mystery writer because she was told she didn't know how to plot. She couldn't come up with a good plot. And she said, well, usually the most intricate plots are mysteries. So she went back and studied mysteries and became a mystery writer.
Good for her.
Did all right. And prove the point. Tell me what I can't do. In suspense, I would go with probably Dean Koontz. Though he crosses over in some of the genres, Dean Koontz, very much so. And thrillers, well, boy, you could just do a whole bunch of those. But I think the first one that's going to come to mind would be Stephen James. Does some good thrillers. Boy, help me out. Who else can we think of that does a great thriller? Of course, much of Stephen King has thriller aspects, but in the horror sense that he has, although he's done some others with that. You know, he did a novella. Now I shouldn't have brought it up because I just forgot it. The Langoliers.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's in the book Four Past Midnight. It's the only story I really liked in that book. I'm not bagging on them for the other three. That's just one resonated with me. And then they did a mini series out of it, which they did a very good job with. And that's a good idea of a suspense novel with a lot of thriller overtones. And the way he did it is one of the characters in the book. It's about an airplane where most of the people disappear. Only a few are left standing. The only thing left behind from the other people on the plane were anything metal in them. So fillings, hip replacements, all of those ended up on the seats, but no people. But there's some that were left, and so it's their job. So it's a suspense because we don't know what's going on. There's a bit of a mystery about why that happened, but it's a thriller because one of the passengers is a nutcase, and it becomes a real issue. So in the thriller, I think I'd put Langoliers. Again, a novella, and I think it's in Four Past Midnight. Stephen James also.
Excellent.
Wow.
I think we've kind of covered what a suspense or what a thriller is, and you've given us a nice little chart. Can you give me some other like hallmarks of a thriller?
Yeah, this would be true a lot for suspense novels too, but especially for a thriller. There's a sympathetic hero. And usually we root for the hero because, well, let's take a military thriller from Tom Clancy in Hunt for Red October. He's working for the CIA, but he's not a spy. He's an analyst. And before he knows it, he's up to his neck in trouble. And so while he's not a trained agent, he's having to do some of that kind of work, fight himself out of trouble, use his brain to solve the problem. So he becomes a very sympathetic hero and is the same in several of Clancy's books. Again, strong military overtone, but it is a military thriller. So there's usually a sympathetic hero, not a perfect hero, just somebody you can root for. And if there isn't that, then there's usually someone the hero is struggling to save that you like. And so you root for the hero to save the other person. So even though he's a bit of an anti-hero, you're still rooting for him. It's also an impossible to ignore and a pressing danger. This is a big, big problem. So again, in my book, Wounds, they don't find this bad guy soon, there could be dozens dead. And then one of the other things you do, my sympathetic hero is a guy who prefers to be alone. He's a seminary professor. And he had a traumatic event as a young man just graduating high school, and it changed him forever. He doesn't like to be around people. He sits in his office is always dark, and he tries to stay away from trouble. Doesn't like society. And then all of a sudden, he's pushed into service with the police department. And these are people he does not know, does not like, and he wants to go and hide. He doesn't get the opportunity. So he's sympathetic in that sense. In a thriller, you want an evil that is far greater than your hero. We may have mentioned this before in the podcast. Folks, I don't remember if we did or not, but there's this thing called the Popeye Principle. Popeye's only a hero if he beats up Brutus. If he beats up Wimpy, then he's just a bully. Then he's a bully. If he beats up Olive Oil, it's even worse. So what's he left with? Okay, so there's always just one really bad guy, and that's Bluto, and he's the only one Popeye is allowed to beat up on. But if you look at this cartoon, Bluto is 2.5 times the size of Popeye, and he's mean. So he's a much bigger danger, and the only way Popeye can win is to pop a can of spinach. Yep. Chug down some spinach, get all that good iron in his system, and then he could take on the world. But in a thriller, there's some problem that cannot be ignored. You can't walk away from it. And the evil that comes from that danger has to be bigger and badder than the hero. And then it's a series of setbacks. You know, we're tracking field season, and you see him run the hurdles. I've never liked the hurdles. And it's every one of those hurdles is a possible setback. It's more than that. It's a possible injury. You know, and so if you're rooting for a runner, you're rooting that he doesn't trip or she doesn't trip in the race. So there's setback after setback. Hero has to overcome, but it's still not solved. It's got to fix another problem. And also with a thriller, there is always a certainty of doom. The odds are impossible. There's no way he's going to win. Can't be done. Yet, your hero has to find a way to do that. Or heroes has to find a way to do that. Unusual setting, and this really makes a thriller to me. So in the Harbinger series, you know, I did The Fog, which is really more of a horror story. But I did another, it would be a fantasy thriller called At Sea, where the team suddenly wakes up not knowing who they are or where they are, and they're on an old ship, a cruise liner, an older cruise liner, like from the 50s. And there's all kinds of nasty things on there. But that made it an unusual setting. So, for example, in a thriller, a frightening setting would be have a serial killer on a cruise ship. And you're at sea. Where are you going to go? What are you going to do?
Yeah.
That's been done in the movies a few times. Plant a bomb on a cruise ship or a plane. A plane's another one because everybody's stuck. Small Town is the next extension of that.
This brings up an idea that we may discuss later about writing the suspense or thriller novel. You talk about these the certain doom and the impossible odds and the unusual setting. The thing about the cruise ship, which I really like that idea, I may have to steal it, is the fact that the locale is so small. It's an isolated environment. They're not getting help from the outside. So what you've done is you've limited the options that your character has to overcome whatever evil it is that they're facing, which makes the evil even more impossible to overcome. And so I think one of the hallmarks and strategies for writing suspense/thriller novels is to really limit the options and the opportunities that your hero has. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would. And again, we can cross these things over. So in the book At Sea, in the novella I did, The Fog, there's horrible little creatures in the fog that kill people. Big teeth, big head. So, you know, that's the horror aspect of it. The next book, At Sea, they're on this ship and they're having to fight some of the bad things they've seen before. They have no way of escaping. They don't even know each other anymore. They're pushed together once again and have to form a team, even though they don't know anything about anyone. But then to make things even worse, they're surrounded by fog and they're sailing into the fog. And they all know there's something wrong in that fog. And so the closer they get to the fog, it just amps up the terror a little bit more, and there's nothing they can do to stop the ship. So they're toast. But then we find a way out.
Hooray. I imagine that's one of the hallmarks also, is the solution to the problem at the end.
Yeah.
The resolution.
Yeah, and let me add this. If you want to write a thriller or a suspense or a mystery, the one thing you need to do is immerse yourself in those books. So when you want to write a thriller, you need to be reading thrillers. Not because you're going to steal from them, but you want to see how they structured it. Okay, and how, do they use shorter chapters, which is what you often do in a suspense book? Do they use those kind of techniques? You study that so you can see how somebody who has done it, made it through, been through editing, all of those kinds of things, they're all your tutors, they're all your teachers. You could study those and see how they did it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Any more hallmarks?
I'm trying to decide, did I go through all of them?
So about the unusual setting.
Yeah, so we stopped there. That's all right. Impossible odds, certain doom, unusual setting. Sometimes a hero who tumbles into danger. I phrase it that way because I think some of the best heroes are those who don't know they're heroes. And all of a sudden they're put in a position where they have to step forward and do those kinds of things. The Poseidon Adventure.
I love that movie.
Okay, the old Poseidon Adventure with Gene Hackman, Shelley Winters, Ernest Borgnine. Fabulous movie. Fabulous movie. A lot of symbolism in it, by the way, which is a whole other story, symbolism in books. But the one who leads a small band to salvation is a priest. The least likely person to be the brave, heroic person has to step forward and lead those people against all odds and against all other advice that they get. So that's a good one. And so he tumbles into that danger, and he becomes the one people turn to save their lives. They make that, I think, some of the best heroes because now they have to discover themselves. A pressing need to survive. There's some reason they have to go. A mother, for example, a woman might give up trying to survive in a particular situation. She's less likely to do that if she has a child who will also die. Then that's a different ball game.
Yeah.
That's a whole different ball game. So a pressing need to survive. In thrillers, often it's to save the world. It's to save a family. It's to stop a criminal who's killing tons of people, to keep a bomb from going off, whatever it might be. There is some kind of pressing need to survive. So the hero can't give in. Action and more action. That's what makes a thriller a thriller. Above a suspense novel. Now, don't get me wrong. My suspense novels have plenty of action in them. In a thriller, we ratchet it up even more.
Wow.
Now, that doesn't mean every scene is a gunfight. There's just more and more action, more and more problems. So you have to, learn to manage those things. And then escalating tension. We all seen a little timeline. Talk about a 3-act play. Little timeline. It's usually shown horizontally. It shouldn't be shown that way. It should be shown at an angle because things are getting worse. It's shown as a slope. In a thriller, it's a very steep slope.
Yeah, I've got my own little plot diagram that I use, and it is, people talk about the plot mountain, and then it just looks like that little triangle, and it's just flat, and then up, and then down, and then I like to think of it more as the emotional investment of the reader with the text. And so with suspenses and thrillers, as you say, Pops, that's going to go up very, very quickly. It's going to start high, right? It's not going to start down at the bottom. It's going to start high with a certain amount of tension already, and then it's going to move up very rapidly from there, and then it will likely fall off a little bit when you resolve the tension. That's going to happen at the end, but it's not going to go all the way down. I don't like the ones that go all the way back down because that to me just sounds like, well, this part is boring because I'm no longer invested. So like you say, Pop, should be on a slope. And I think of that slope as the emotional investment of the reader versus the number of pages in the book. So the further they go into the book, the more invested they become in it emotionally. Does that make sense?
Yeah, another outline that's been used or timeline is a stair step, and you'll see those drawn every once in a while where you go always flat for a little bit, then it's a step up, more tension, then a step up, more tension. And that's true in a thriller, except those steps are very short. There's more of them. They keep popping up and up and up to keep it going. In suspense, those periods between the escalation may be a little bit longer. In a mystery, they can be very long because the crime's already occurred. So the action is, can my hero, can Father Brown, sorry, I started thinking of another father, a mystery solver, Father Dowling, that's a different series. Can the sleuth figure it out? In a suspense, what you do is there's been a murder and your sleuth is trying to figure it out, but he has to do it before another murder. And now your mystery is becoming a suspense book. If he encounters problems along the way, people trying to kill him, other people dying, then your mystery that's become a suspense book has now become a thriller.
Wow.
See how that works? Maketh sense?
Yes, but it
Indeed
kind of
it
hurts
does.
my head a little bit.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, Molly. If anybody could do this, you know, I mean, if we're easy, anybody could do it. Okay. Right? So the people who press on are the ones that impress me.
I will conquer.
That's it. You just keep going. Easy or not, it doesn't matter. You keep going.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Well, we are rapidly running out of time, Pops, and we've got quite a bit left to go through. So I don't know. Do you want to just kind of go through your list here of, we've talked about what it is and the hallmarks of a suspense and a thriller, and we, our readers, or our listeners rather, can hopefully gather from that some things that they should be doing in their suspense novels, their thriller novels, the points that they should be hitting. But let's maybe get a little bit more to the practical. Do you have any kind of practical advice of just sound bites even that our reader or listeners can take away from this?
Sure. Okay, so let's say now you want to do a thriller or a suspense, but let's do the thriller because it's a little more complicated, but the same things will apply to the suspense. All right, so here's what you do. You're going to start with the above ingredients that we've already talked about. Again, pick up the notes, go to Aaron's page, and you can download the notes. I'm going to suggest you write in 3 acts. Don't go overboard on this. Some people think the 3-act structure ruins a story because they're tied to it. I've written them in 2 acts. I've written them in 4. You can't go wrong in 3 acts. Start off thinking in 3 acts, and you'll get to the end. So if you're new at this, that's what I'd suggest. Act 1, you meet your characters. They encounter the problem. Start fast, especially in a thriller. You want to start right up front with whatever the problem is. Start fast, drag the reader into the story. Don't lure them in. You do that in a mystery. You drag them in by the lapels. Then you, at the end of the Act 1, you come to a plot point. A plot point is just simply a transition between the acts where something significant has happened. Your protagonist walks through a door, the door slams shut behind him, and for all of Act 2, they're involved in solving that problem. Act 1 is usually 25%. Don't get busy doing the math. It's about a quarter of your book. Act 2 is about half your book with a mid-act bump, just so things don't lag too much. At the end of Act 2, you're going to have another big problem, something that's really going to be the big setback. Your character walked through the door, that door shuts to, and now you force the hero to do something extremely difficult that he or she does not want to do but has to do. And throughout Act 3, the hero charges towards a solution against all odds. And then the resolution is hero wins, yippee, and everybody starts breathing again. Yay. So as you're doing this, think of keeping up the pace, especially in a thriller. It's all pacing. What some writers do is they use very short chapters. I've done a few books like this, and there are other authors that are doing this. What they do is they make every scene, unless it's a really short scene, make every scene a chapter. So a chapter might be 1.5 pages long, 2 pages long. And the reason is the reader feels like they're reading very quickly. They're getting through the book fast, so you're keeping up the pace. So that's why shorter chapters keep up the pace, shorter chapters, not a shorter book, just shorter chapters. So you plan on 70 chapters or something like that.
Wow.
It sounds like a lot, but it's really not. If each chapter is 2 pages long, you got 140 pages. It's not even enough for a book. Usually when I'm doing thrillers, I'm planning 70, 75 chapters or scenes turned into chapters. I don't do them that short necessarily on suspense books.
Is it detrimental to have longer chapters? I mean, obviously, based on what you're saying, it can be. So
it can be, because we live in an age of shortened attention span.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're used to a half-hour show being 22 minutes long, and the rest of it commercials.
Right.
An hour show is 44 minutes.
Right.
So even a movie on television that runs for 2 hours really isn't 2 hours. It's about an hour and a half. Shorter chapters enhances reading. It also gives, in a very busy society, a chance for somebody to get through a chapter, quit, go off, do what they need to do, and pick up at the beginning of a chapter, feeling like they've achieved something and moving along. And remember, all those are contrivances. Okay, you could write a book with no chapters, but it probably isn't beneficial.
Okay.
Always serve the reader. Serve the story, serve the reader.
Okay.
And if that'll do it, you're good. So leave the reader hanging at the end of each chapter, too. You want them to come back. The old cliffhangers. When Aaron was up here, we were showing him my grandkids, the old Batman serials you used to have to go to the movie theater to see. They always left them hanging at the end. Okay, we still do the same thing in contemporary literature. Let the environment be a character. Read some Dean Koontz. His environment is a character. Rain is a character with Dean Koontz. Okay, so let that foreshadow. Let that set the background and the emotions. So let the environment be a character. Use sensory-rich language. Aaron's talked about this several times. Use more than one sense. You don't have to use all of them at one time, but use more than one when describing something. Write for the eye, okay, then for the heart. You're writing for the eye, making it easy to read, or easy to consume, but you want those words to impact the heart. Most point of view should be from the hero, even if you're using third person. Even an ensemble cast, most of it should be from the hero's point of view, not all of it. And then my rule of thumb is, my hero's present, I'm in his point of view. I've departed from that maybe a half dozen times, for a reason. I was pushed into it because of the circumstance, but otherwise it's from my hero's point of view if my hero's present.
Got it.
And last two things. Make a situation so bad you're not sure your hero will survive. So when you start, you're pretty convinced your hero's going to die. That's it. And then it's your job to figure out how to keep him alive. And then I think this is probably the best one of all. Surprise yourself.
Yeah, I agree with that. Surprising yourself, I think, is very, very key, because if you're not surprised, then your reader's probably not going to be surprised either. So we can give you tips and tricks. We're not giving you a formula to follow. If we did, every book would be the same and there'd be no sense in reading. But we've mentioned some things. Pops, I like what you say about starting fast. In Harrison Sawyer, or Who is Harrison Sawyer, I begin with the murder at the beginning. A very unconventional murder, as you called it, a gentle murder. And then in chapter 1, we've got a funeral. And so the normalcy of my character's life is already upset. It's already been disturbed. I don't spend the first chapter trying to establish what his normal life is just to mess it up. You already know from the get-go that something is wrong. So it doesn't have to be a gunshot. It doesn't have to be a dead body, but it should be something more than Bob couldn't sleep. You want that ticking clock. And Pops, you talk about the shorter chapters and keeping the action moving. Oftentimes you'll hear people talk about the ticking clock, which is if something doesn't happen, if your character doesn't achieve his or her goals by a certain time, something drastic is going to happen. The world is going to end on Tuesday. That gives your hero 2 or 3 days to save the world, whatever the case may be. But there's a clock that's ticking. You see this a lot in television shows. I was watching The Flash with my kids the other day, and of course the bad guy doesn't kill Flash when he has a chance. Instead, he just turns it into an example. Look, I beat the Flash, and if you don't do X, Y, and Z by such and such a time, I'm going to do other unspeakable things. It's the bank holdup where you've got hostages and give me all this money or I kill a hostage every hour. And so there's some sort of sense that something dreadful is coming and we need to avoid that. You've talked about the villain being bigger and badder than your hero. The stakes need to be high. It needs to be something that the character cares about and that the reader is going to care about. Sometimes it's life or death, but sometimes it's just somebody's livelihood. It could be the person accused of a crime they didn't commit, and now they stand to go to jail, or to lose their family or their reputation. It could be the end of the world, but it doesn't always have to be quite so high. But there needs to be something that matters to the character that they stand to lose. And you mentioned surprise yourself. I also would say let your character win right before they lose. And I think it's important to remember that your character is not always going to win. And so look for opportunities where they can lose the battle, but still have an opportunity to win the war, if that makes sense. I went through that very quickly. I have some more specific notes and examples on the show notes that will be up on aarongansky.com, likely tomorrow morning, tomorrow afternoon sometime. Probably tomorrow afternoon, more realistically. So you can kind of check those out. But does that all make sense?
It does. It does.
Good. Excellent. We did start a little bit late, so we rushed through the end there. We're a little bit over time, but that's okay. Molly, do we have any questions or relevant comments from the chat room?
We don't have too many. I was asking the room how they like to, if they prefer to outline or not. And Sophia Hansen says she writes her characters as if she were stepping into their shoes. She plays role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons on and off, and it's all about building the story together, reacting to the unknowns. And I thought that was really great because there's not a lot of people that will actually actively, in reality, interact with the characters that they're writing. So I think that's a great way of doing it. I do that, so I'm glad to know other people do too. Stephen Golden said he is, as he was listening about the genres, he's wondering what genre would Frank Peretti's Monster fit into? What do you guys think? I've not read it.
Boy, I have to go back and think about. Is that the one with the Sasquatch?
I honestly don't recall. I feel like I had the book, but I'm not sure that I read it, or if I read it, it was years and years and years ago. I want to say, based on Peretti's body of work, supernatural horror / allegory, if that's a thing. At the least, I would call it a thriller, just based on his body of work. That seems to be kind of the genre that he gravitates to and writes most commonly in. I don't know if Pops, if you have a more direct insight to that.
I'm trying to remember the book. If it's the one I'm thinking, it's got a Sasquatch in it, and I would definitely call it. It's certainly a suspense, and it might be a thriller, but it's been so long since I've read it, I couldn't say.
Well, there you go. That
Reed
is.
Shelton.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just reading it. Reed Shelton organized the survival weekend, hired the best guide in the region, meticulously trained, studied, and packed while encouraging his wife to do the same. But little did they know that surviving the elements would become the least of their worries. So yeah, they're in the forest. Something begins pursuing them. A huge creature. So yeah, it's
I think that's what it
huge
is.
creature carrying the wife. Yeah.
Wow. Sounds interesting.
Yeah. Other comments or questions?
Becky Lindsay says the podcast always makes her want to start writing when it's done, even though it's her usual writing time is much earlier. So thanks for the inspiration. I was thinking the same thing tonight. I didn't participate too much with it being what it was, you guys had all the information in the show notes. I knew I couldn't contribute much to it. I felt very much like being that I was in a classroom tonight, but it was a fun classroom, and it's always very informative. I like when I'm able to participate, but I also very much, of course, appreciate when I'm able to learn from you guys. So
excellent. Yeah. Well, this was fun. It's Stephen Galden. Good to see you here in the chat room. It's been quite some time. And Sophia, also good to see you. So, and Dave popped in. Hi, Dave. Thanks for coming late.
Dave.
So, Dan looks like maybe his first time joining us in the chat room. So, Dan, thanks for being here. Becky, thanks for hanging out with us. Glad to see you here again. And Andy, who's popped in and out occasionally throughout the night. So, well, in a couple of weeks on August 22nd, we're going to be talking about everything you wanted to know about writing fiction, but were afraid to ask. I'm sure it'll be a very short podcast, but that should be a lot of fun. So we hope you join us for that. And until then, we thank you so much for listening, and good writing.